So thank you for joining us today. We're talking about app modernization and what custom app development really looks like in the modern day. And as we talk about that, a large part of the way that we approach working with our clients and our partners comes down to having to focus on security and compliance as a large part of that application modernization effort. Creating new technologies and putting new innovative solutions in place to solve business problems is at the core of what we love doing. But whenever we create something new, there's a potential to create new security holes and run against new compliance guardrails and guidelines that we weren't aware that we needed to apply to. So with me today, I have Rob Aguchi and Bob Abel, and they're going to help us kind of walk through what security and compliance really looks like with an application modernization project. So guys, thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate it. But as we kind of step through an app modernization project or a legacy monolith uplift, what kind of problems do we run into, or what do we see that we can resolve as we look through that lens of security and compliance?
Yeah, I'll start. I think, when you raise a good term like this monolith, right? So a lot of applications, it's rare that you're modernizing these little bits of applications. You start mostly these legacy applications are large. You're dealing with this large onion. You got to peel back the layers, and as you do so, you're finding more problems. And as it relates to security, over time, as this application got larger and larger and larger, I think a lot of the challenges with respect to security is being able to still be compliant with security practices that have been put in place for the company itself. And as much as you'd like to still be adhere to those policies from within the application, it could be anything from the technology, the architecture, the way the application was put together, where you can't really adhere as best to the company policies as you'd like to. So the idea of modernizing an application gives you a lot of great benefits. You can break down the monolith, you can increase agility and performance and various other things within the application itself. And specifically with security, you have that opportunity then to start implementing and advancing the company's security policies, adhere to what's been put in place, make sure treat security as a first-class citizen again. Think about it, implement those things up front, not as I created my application, I'm done, let's think about security now. Those are the old days, hopefully old days. But now make it a first-class citizen, actually implement them, roll them out, set of requirements, just like functional requirements and everything, and being able to introduce all of that good security stuff, so you have a good security posture within the application that supports all the company strategies behind it.
So one of the big pieces here, as you're doing like a new app modernization, is really that you get to refocus on each of the components of those monolith applications, or even the new applications that you're developing, and be able to really reevaluate not just what was built, but what could be built and the possibilities that you can reapply to that solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from, when you have a larger application, it's a little bit more challenging to apply security at a granular level, or maybe at a service line perspective, because it's this one big thing. But as you break down the application through the modernization process, you have the ability then to wrap security around these smaller services that you're creating, and be able to better define and better apply those securities as you want to throughout the process, instead of having maybe not being able to when it's just one large system.
Yeah. And typically when you're using newer technologies like containers or automated processes to build and spin up the modern application, it allows you to reduce your scope on what you have to secure. In a sense, you don't necessarily have to secure servers anymore. You don't have to necessarily secure specific access to resources that you might have had to do if you were traditionally spinning up a Windows front-end server or a SQL back-end server. You can kind of keep those pieces in the cloud, typically with what app modernization is going to nowadays. And reducing your scope allows you to focus in a little more on those smaller pieces that you have to secure. So
it really gives you the ability, and we've got a couple other sessions that we've been running on this through this series, talking about containerization and serverless and microservices. But as you talk about that, your scope really becomes the most important piece here, because your policy can actually be adjusted so that it doesn't have to be as far-reaching with patching or what have you as you get into modern technology platforms, like containers and serverless and et cetera. But what other policies might you have to add in then to really support some of these newer technologies? Because I assume that there's going to be additional needs that where we can reduce scope in certain ways, we probably have to expand in others, right?
Yeah, and it gives you an opportunity to reassess the security controls you have in place. You're going to have to address cloud security or how you're going to secure workloads that are publicly facing, hosted in someone else's data center, essentially, if you're going with a public cloud solution. If you haven't used containers before, you're going to have to address the controls around how you would secure containers that are going to be a little different than if you had to secure an endpoint like a Windows or a Linux server. And things of that nature. If you're going through the automated CI/CD pipelines that may not have been in place before, you have to figure out how you would scope that out. It might allow you an opportunity to introduce things like application security scanning, things of that nature that are a little more automated and give you an opportunity to readdress some of the security things that are on newer technologies that wouldn't have existed in an older application.
And you actually touch on a great point there too, and I didn't even think about this, but like going into these modern platforms also give this the ability to really treat security as more code than some of the traditional tooling that we had in place for on-prem, for example, monolith application development processes, right? You can really build it into your CI/CD pipeline and find some additional ways to try to drive security throughout the application stack.
Yeah, and if you wanted to build different, I don't know, Terraform or things like that nature, where you're spinning up resources and spinning them down, you can include things in there that allow you to control access to those resources and those sort of items. There's going to be different ways you can automate security. If you need to react to some security incidents or things like that, you can build automation into that process as well.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the automation that Bob's mentioning, we really have a good opportunity to take advantage to be able to, not only set the policy, implement the policy, but really govern and enforce the policy through things like static code analysis and the like, and build it into the process. And it really it helps us to pay more attention to, did we implement it correctly? Did we implement it per requirements? And have the tools themselves help call out the things we did right, that we did wrong, and be able to correct and adapt as we go forward.
So it goes back to that original statement you had, right? Security as a first-class citizen, building it into every step in the process and finding that way to make sure that realistically your policy becomes part of the culture of developing this application.
Right. Culture is a key thing, in terms of security and a lot of other things too, but having security become a first-class citizen is really a mindset, right? You have to think about it up front. You have to really be aware of security as a part of the design process, not just we'll implement it based on all of these functional requirements that we have. We'll just secure them as we go along. It's really baked into the architecture and design, and all of these cool tools that exist today to help define and implement and structure your security is a great to have. And those things may not have been available in those legacy applications and things that were written a decade or more ago, but where today it makes implementing security a lot simpler, and then governing security on top of that a lot more easily done as well. Right, so you can actually measure how good a job we did in terms of implementing security by having all of these processes and procedures in place as throughout the development process. So that continuous improvement, continuous feedback loop, we'll be able to see not only how many bugs did our code produce or how many issues did we have, but how many security holes did we have? What did we do right with security? And have these things kind of stand up and tell us, hey, you missed us a spot over here, fix me. And where that might have not been available to us, in the olden times.
As we kind of get through some of this conversation and we start talking really about building out that culture, the hardest part about security and compliance controls, defining the policy on one hand and then operationalizing it and turning that into reportable and actionable intel. How do you define success? How do you know when you're doing it right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that stems from what the business requirements are. So it's going to be a lot of meetings with leadership to determine what the success criteria is and what compliance standards they need to adhere to. in order to secure their data, because they're the ones that own that data, right? And so a lot of success is defined by, okay, we've got these security policies, we've got these security controls we have to adhere to in order to be compliant or maintain standards that the business has put forth. Now that we've architected, designed, and implemented this solution, does it adhere to those controls that we set forth at the beginning of it? And that's a lot of what it is. It's just well-defined controls at the outset, adhering to those controls through the design process, and then do an assessment afterwards to make sure that all of those things were followed. And that's pretty much where it would be, in my opinion, on a successful implementation.
That makes a lot of sense. And what sounds like a large part of what you're saying is really that alignment of the security office, the business unit, and technology, and coming up with that solid criteria to say this is success so that you can not only implement it, but measure it at the end.
Yeah, the most successful security practices I've ever been a part of were things that were driven from the top down. You as a security person can't say, well, we need to adhere to these HIPAA controls or we need to adhere to this ISO control, and then find that when you go to different organizations or groups in your organization that have to follow those controls, they're not going to necessarily buy in unless the management team is the ones that are putting forth those standards, I guess, or the policies, right?
Yeah, I was just going to add, as far as success goes, you're looking at an improved risk mitigation across the entire platform, infrastructure, networking, app, data. It's not just the application when we're talking about app modernization. It's the entire platform from A to Z, right? And to me, the key is, as Bob alluded to as well, being able to have measurable and actionable items come from the things we did well in implementing the security and adhering to those security practices. We can't let it be subjective. We can't let it be Bob's opinion of security. We did a good job. Rob's opinion of security. We could have done a better job. But the data is the data, and those measurables that come out of what we've implemented. Those are the ones that are going to tell the true story about how close we actually were to being successful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, whenever we talk about security at a broader stance, right, we're always talking about the security policy that maps to the security control, that maps then to the incident management, and has a measurable result of success or failure throughout a time period.
Yeah. And the other thing I would like to add, kind of to follow up on some of this stuff too, security can often be seen as a blocker, right? And as you're modernizing your application, I feel like there's going to be a shorter runtime to release, things like that. So you need to speed up the processes by which you get things out the door. And if security isn't designed to kind of not be a blocker in those situations, security should never be an impediment to innovation, if that makes sense. Like, you need to be able to control your data, but you don't want to impede your users' ability to do what they need to do in an efficient manner.
Yeah, and you actually hit on a great point there, because security actually should be an enabler at this point, from identity management through document classification or whatever the security control might be. It's really about defining what technology and platform we want to build on so that it can be done in a smart and efficient manner rather than having to go back and redo things because we have a security leak.
Right, exactly.
That makes complete sense to me. Sorry, you just like struck a bell for me there, because when it comes down to it, I see these projects that go out and, you've got somebody that loves, for example, .NET, right? And they just go build everything with snippets they found online and just push it in, and all of a sudden you have a product on a service, but then there's none of that structure or pattern that's then reusable for the future.
Right.
So. Yeah, a lot of times I'd say security its best friend at times is testing. Testing and security often go hand in hand with being pushed way back and getting the short end of any project stick when it comes to, I got to meet a date, I got to meet a deadline. The important thing is getting these features in place. So, again, I'm beating on the culture thing and being able to push things far left, but it all kind of goes together. Security can be another fun topic for another time, but I'm sorry, testing can be another good topic for another time.
Well, and I was just going to say, even that you just hit on one of the points that I love hearing from folks, especially when it comes to SMEs, and that is shift left, right? And that concept is one of the biggest ones that we can talk about too, because when we talk about testing, it's all about doing that. Yeah, getting as far left as you can in the organization. So it sounds like both of you are kind of landing on the same thing. Really, for security to be successful, and for compliance and for even the app modernization project to be successful, you've got to have strong testing, measurable results with something that you can say, this is our finish line. And you want to define that early in the process so that your developers can follow those guidelines from start to finish.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and those requirements, having that good set of requirements is going to help also define whether, we've been successful as well. You have your requirements, you have your acceptance criteria that go along with those requirements.
Mhm.
Did we meet them? Yes, we did. The tools will tell us whether we truly did, and then we can be happy afterwards after we get, everything's green instead of red.
And that's all part of the project too, I guess, right? Is getting the tooling to actually start doing all of that stuff in an automated fashion so you don't have human intervention for everything that you're putting out there on the testing
Yeah.
side.
We definitely want to remove the human component whenever we can, right? We want automated, repeatable processes that provide consistent and confident results to us, regardless of topic, right? And as soon as I have to come in and say, this doesn't look right, or that doesn't look right, or color this one red, color that one yellow, we go back to being subjective again, and we don't want that.
So I think we've got a good definition of success here, right? We know where we want to get to, and that's how we want to run our projects.
Mhm.
So this is going to be a big one, guys, but can you walk me through? I mean, if I was going to walk into an organization, and this can be one that you're working on today if you want, but can you walk me through from start to finish what a project like this would look like with a focus on security and compliance, and what it can really be when it's successful? And even if you had problems on it, right? Talk me through some of those problems, I guess, and tell me how you got around them and how you kind of resolved some of those issues.
I think the first step, the most important first step when you're going through one of these projects is you need to meet with the compliance team, you need to meet with the security team. If they don't have one of those, you need to meet with the business leaders or management to set forth the criteria for success. What scope are we trying to define here for what do we need to secure? And then what controls do we need to put in place to secure those things so that we're adhering to the business policies or the security policies, compliance policies that are set forth and governing the business. And so that's going to be the critical first step. And then that would sort of build your requirements towards what you would need to architect going forward as you go towards architecting and designing the application.
Yeah, and I'd say adding to that, sometimes is a bad word, assessment. You have to know where the starting line is. You have to have a good understanding of where you want to take and what where the finish line is, and then you got to define that path in between. Right. And I know that's pretty vague, but I think it is really applicable to a lot of the work that you end up doing, be it security or other areas of focus. That modernization process can be super successful at that point, just understanding all of those things are, the starting line, the finish line, and the path between.
Yeah. So, I mean, realistically, what you're both saying then is a good solid set of requirements. And it sounds like you're even saying break it down into like small achievable results. Don't take the big bang theory on everything that we try to do here, but define that finish line ahead of time so that everybody's in agreement, and really getting consensus on that agreement is going to be required before you start getting down the path.
Yeah, like anything else, that having that definition of done, even if it's multiple things that have to be done, is critical. Right? We can split the big pile of work up into smaller efforts, defining done for each of those efforts, and we'll find that we make a lot more progress, a lot more traction, and become a lot more successful in doing so.
And it really comes down to that whole idea of, we talk about agile frameworks and, delivering in a DevOps culture, right? And it's trying to make sure that you, in essence, build security and compliance throughout that entire process as well. So that, again, it becomes part of the culture.
Yeah.
Not to hit that dead horse, right? But I want to make sure that we really, it sounds like that's what we're really saying over and over right now, is that it's all about bringing it back to that culture of security and compliance becomes part of everything that we do.
It is. And I'd say, I love the idea of, fail fast, fail small, and being able to not wait until the end of to hit the finish line where you're like, oh, we made a huge mistake. We got to go back and rerun the race all over again. Does nobody any good. But that continuous cycle of continuous improvement and feedback loop and all of that good stuff is part of any kind of, proper SDLC, is vital for any area of the application, the platform, the things that you're actually working on, and security is right up there.
Yeah, and assessing and remediating throughout the process is going to take time. And so if you have that culture where everyone in the organization is mindful of security, you're going to reduce the amount of things you're going to have to remediate as they're building out the application or building out the infrastructure, or building out the databases. If they're already mindful of what security controls they need to be putting into place, and they might not get it perfectly, but it's better than nothing, right? So that's where culture is very important.
Yeah, it's a lot easier, Bob, to tell somebody, not to put credentials in clear text in a text file.
Yes.
Day one, instead of
It is.
catching it 10,000 places later, at day 100.
Yeah, and it's funny how, I mean, even something as simple as security awareness training for developers or infrastructure people, it's something simple like that is to go a long way towards the culture, and then what they might do later on, even if it's not related to the training they got, they could, like you said, Rob, they could be like, oh, wait a minute, I shouldn't put my email password in plain text. Maybe I shouldn't put the password that accesses the database in plain text either. So
You actually just hit something that I'd love to hear about a little bit more too, Bob, is that what are some of the strategies that companies can take about, like, what are some of the base level pieces that can be used to make sure that they're getting this message out throughout the organization, right? And you kind of hit one there, right? It's an awareness training program, right? And this is something that almost everybody's been doing over the last year and a half as we've gone through work from home, et cetera. But I'm willing to bet there's a few other approaches that we could take that would improve our stance on security within our organizations.
Yeah, I mean, setting forth good policies, I think, for your employees to adhere to. I know we've done some non-functional requirements that outline some security guidelines for people to develop against at organizations we're working with right now. There's products out there that you can leverage to do quarterly security training, or however often you want to do that, and you can tailor that to specific areas, right? If you want to teach people how to use email, that's one thing, but there's also areas in there for secure coding practices. I know there's products out there that do security scanning that also couple that with secure coding practice training, because you want to reduce that time for remediation. And a lot of that is just teaching people on how to secure their code properly. So then you don't have to go back and say, well, you got 100 different things we got to fix. On top of that, just getting people I feel like people are getting more and more mindful. Like you said, Jeremy, as we work from home, we're all on VPN. Okay. People are being targeted now for phishing attempts, and how do I secure my laptop if I'm carrying it around with me? Maybe I shouldn't pick up a USB stick in the parking lot and put it in my computer or something like that. But just continuing to be mindful that there are bad actors out there trying to get into your data, and there are a lot of different ways that we need to secure that, and it starts with the individual, if that makes sense.
No, I think you kind of nailed it there for me, even, right? It's not the responsibility of just the security department or security officer in an organization. It's end to end, from customer service all the way through execs and everything in between.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody's responsible in making, for a secure application, a secure workplace. Communication and awareness, I think, are hugely important, and have that come from the top down so that everybody's aware. We're all on the same page. We all know what we're doing, what risk mitigations we have in place, what the policies and procedures are, what we should do when we think we might have a phishing attempt. Like, don't click the link, don't submit don't hit click on the button. But making sure everybody is aware and continually knows what the expectations are from security is a big part of making sure we're all safe.
Security and compliance is a huge jail to unpack, and it's just one of those things that becomes a struggle for us to identify where to start and where to really focus our efforts, our time, and our money. So if there's any advice the two of you can give, even us or and our clients, for kind of where to get started in this process and how to start engaging the teams and the culture so that they can start moving the ball forward and seeing tangible results in a short time period, I think that would be great.
I think the hardest part in security is establishing the why, and the why would be your security policies and why you're trying to secure your data, or why you're trying to achieve certain controls in your organization. And a lot of that comes from the top down. The business owners need to recognize that security is something that we need to value, whether or not they're legally required to do so. Like if you're handling PHI data or PII data, or if you're a European country or in California where they have different legal requirements for cyber or for data and security. If you're not one of those organizations, you need to settle on a framework that you think would govern your organization. And there's plenty of them, good ones out there. And you can't really go wrong with any of them. And then after that, you just need to define your scope. So what are we trying to secure? And reduce the scope as much as possible, if that makes sense, because the wider your scope, the more costly and more effort it's going to take to do it. And so we could use an example like at one of the organizations we're working at right now. If they handle PHI data, we want to reduce where that PHI data lives. And then we'll have two different security policies that govern those different areas. So we're going to have different controls and more strict controls on the PHI data, and we're going to try to reduce that to only the database servers or the web front ends or the servers that are going to hit that. And then for everybody else, let's come up with a less strict one. I mean, we still want to adhere to security controls, but that's where we would go from there. And then on top of that, just start. We were working yesterday with a compliance team, and we're trying to build out our policy and control documentation. And right now, he used an analogy of a blank sheet of paper, right? Where do we start? Where do we write? What do we write here? You stare at the blank sheet of paper, and the best answer is to just pick one and start. So what is the most applicable to you? If it's endpoint security right now, because you want to secure your laptops and desktops and servers, then start with that. If you want to do your access controls, do that. If you're pushing towards the cloud, then you need to start thinking of the different things you need to control up in the public cloud space. So that would be what I would tell organizations on how to start that journey.
So really to kind of try to summarize and wrap that into a few distinct steps, it's really first start with the why and define that why. Then get to the what, your scoping, right? And narrow that down as far as you can. Mm-hmm. And then it really comes down to the details of how you're going to do that with the different controls or mechanisms that you're going to use to manage that scope and the reason why you're doing it.
100%. That's that. You put it very succinctly there. That was good.
Awesome. I love it because I'm making sure I understand you're right. This is not my specialty in any way, shape, or form. So
I always like the what, how, and why, with the key being when. Right? It's the when that drives a lot of the what, how, and the what and the how part anyway.
That's a good point though too, Rob. I mean, a big part of this is going to be not just what we're going to do and how we're going to report it, but when does it become important within the process of modernizing your applications?
How much at what times throughout the process. You identify and you prioritize the most critical things that need to be implemented first, and then you work through your whole list of things that you have to do. But when becomes important around things that need to be implemented either contractually or regulatory or things like that, and those are the ones you do first, and you work out the rest as time schedule dictates.
And if you're talking about an app modernization project, it gives you a good chance to reboot and rethink some of these processes. And there's never a better chance to start fresh than when you're trying to redesign or re-architect a product that you have. So
and Bob, one of the things that actually comes to mind now in terms of some current efforts, the idea of we have a lot of things built out on-prem, from a security posture, policies, a practice, and then all of a sudden we're like, hey, we're going to try this cloud thing. And now all of a sudden we got to extend that. We have greenfield. We don't have a cloud footprint just yet. But, one of the first couple of things that we actually did in terms of doing that cloud work or extending our footprint out into the cloud, security was at the forefront. We made sure that, who has access to what, who can do what. Once we got into the cloud, we try to establish all of that first. And, we're still early in the process, but it was an interesting thing that we have all of these on-prem practices and policies and procedures in place, and we're trying to translate them as we go forward into the cloud. Some translate well, some not so much, and so we're evolving the whole security strategy just because now we've incorporated this cloud component.
And one thing that I found refreshing, and to kind of tie it back into what we were talking about earlier, is that a lot of these public cloud, the major ones anyway, AWS, Azure, Google, they have security products that really enable you to do work in the cloud, right? Where it's not an impediment to do things. If you configure it properly, if you architect it properly, you can have the peace of mind that your resources and your data is secure up there. But you can put in processes and automation to allow your users or your developers or your infrastructure team to spin up resources and spin down resources, and they're going to be secure, which I thought has been a really cool part of the going to the cloud journey that I've experienced so far.
And it sounds like a lot of that security control mapping, the translation of the on-prem policy into cloud policy, hasn't been as difficult as some would make people think, right? It sounds like it could be a fairly hard lift, but you're finding that a lot of times you're finding some things that translate cleanly, and then you just have to rework things here and there. Then, Rob?
Yeah, I think some of the things the cool part that Bob was alluding to with some of the technology in the cloud being able to take advantage of things like, Active Directory, right? And we have this on-prem Active Directory set up, and yeah, we're taking advantage of Azure AD, not to name drop, but the idea of, extending that and having that sync come out there. And now we have this cloud presence, and, how do we secure that? Well, we can take advantage of, integrating with Azure AD as a result of the things that we want to do in our cloud space, and take advantage of all of the, a lot of the things that we already had in place. We have to think of, newer groups and, permissions and the like for the things that we're going to be doing in this cloud. But the foundation was there, right? So we didn't really have to start net new. We were able to, at least we had a good jumping off point for security as we were looking at it for the cloud.
And that's critical whenever we're talking about application modernization, right? We're never really starting from scratch. It's very rare we get the opportunity to work with a client where they have absolutely nothing. So you're always taking something and building upon it, right?
Right. And I'd caution that's where some of that assessment comes in. If they have something and it's not worth taking forward,
Yeah.
we got to be smart enough to actually, push that aside and start net new. But you're right. A lot of those other types of practices that may already be in place, we're going to look at that and we're going to say, this is pretty good. You've got a good start or a good direction. We can clean some stuff up here, but again, it's a good head start, and we can take that forward.
So a large part of this is, let's evaluate what you have today and what your core concepts are for the project. And you can always find some places where there's improvements, right? But at that point, it's just prioritization of, is this important for us today? And that talks about that scoping effort, right? Is what's important and where do we want to put the guardrails around so that we've got the effort going in the right place for each of the projects that go forward.
Yeah, one of the another cautionary tale is the idea that we're gonna have this reboot mentality. We're gonna all of a sudden have a green field because we're taking this app modernization journey. Well, that still doesn't mean we have all the time, money, and resources in the world to do all of these cool things. We still have to kind of temper that with obviously best practices and the like, but make sure we're doing what's right for the project and the company, and not just add in a whole lot of additional scope because we have this greenfield and opportunity to do so.
And that goes back to that original statement of, let's make sure we align the business and the technology and the security office in the right places to, just because it's cool technology doesn't mean it gets implemented, right? So
absolutely. I know, in my day, I like to click buttons, so I just got to remind myself whether or not I'm in scope and clicking this button or not.